While washing the car, I found a wallet under the seat. Inside was the ID of my fiancée's ex, the one she swore she'd cut off 2 years ago. I followed them to a motel outside Los Angeles. That's when I knocked on their door. I was washing the car because it needed it, and because routine keeps things quiet in your head. The sun was already low, the kind of late afternoon light that makes dust and water spots impossible to ignore. The wedding planning had turned everything into lists and deadlines, and the car was one of the few things I could control without anyone else weighing in. I pulled the mats out, sprayed them down, and opened every door to let the heat out. When I slid the vacuum nozzle under the passenger seat, it caught on something solid. At first I thought it was a loose bolt or a phone case. I pushed harder, dragged it forward, and a wallet slid out onto the concrete. It was worn, dark brown, and heavy in the way wallets get when they have been carried too long and never cleaned out. I assumed it was mine for a second, even though I knew it was not. I checked my pocket out of habit anyway. My wallet was still there. I picked up the one from the ground and opened it without thinking. The first thing I saw was an ID card, slightly bent at the corner. The face on it was unfamiliar, but the name was not. Qley. I did not react the way people expect in stories. There was no rush of heat, no shaking hands, no immediate panic. There was just a slow tightening in my chest, like something had been tied there carefully and pulled 1 inch too far. I knew the name because I had heard it before, more than once. Lena had mentioned it early in our relationship, always with the same tone. Qley was the ex who had drained her, manipulated her, made her feel small, and then refused to let go. She said she cut him off 2 years earlier, blocked his number, and warned mutual friends not to pass along messages. She told me that chapter was closed. The ID looked recent. The photo was recent. The expiration date was not close. This was not an old wallet forgotten in a drawer. I closed it and leaned against the car for a moment, listening to the hose drip onto the driveway. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes everything feel normal even when it is not. I checked the inside of the wallet more carefully. Credit cards, a debit card, a folded receipt from a convenience store dated 3 days earlier, and a small card from a motel. Not a key card. A loyalty punch card with a logo I recognized without effort. It was one of those roadside motels just outside Los Angeles, the kind people use when they do not want to be noticed. I did not confront Lena when she came home later that evening. I did not leave the wallet on the counter or ask careless questions. I put it back under the passenger seat exactly where I found it, pushing it deeper so it would not slide out again. That decision mattered more than I understood at the time. Over the next few days, I paid attention in a way I had not before. Not obsessively, not dramatically. I just stopped filling in the blanks for her. When she said she was running errands, I noticed how long she was gone. When she said traffic was bad, I checked the route afterward. When her phone buzzed and she turned the screen down, I registered it without comment. Nothing I saw alone would have meant anything. Together, it formed a pattern that did not need interpretation. It was already clear. The wallet stayed in the car. That was important. It meant whoever owned it had been in the passenger seat recently enough to forget it and comfortable enough to assume it would not be discovered. That detail did more damage than the ID ever could. 2 nights later, Lena told me she was meeting a co-worker to go over a project. She said it casually, the way people do when they expect no follow-up. She left in the car, the same one I had washed, and I waited long enough for her to be fully gone before getting into my own. I did not follow her immediately. I gave her space. I wanted to know where she went when she thought she was alone. She did not go to her office. She did not go downtown. She drove toward the edge of the city, took exits she never used, and parked in a lot I recognized before I saw the sign. The motel sat back from the road, partially hidden by a row of dying trees. It looked exactly the way those places always look, like it had been designed to disappear. I stayed far enough back that she would not notice me, but close enough to see her get out of the car. She checked her phone twice before walking toward the rooms. A few minutes later, another car pulled in. A man got out. Qley matched his ID photo more closely than I would have liked. They did not greet each other like strangers reconnecting. They walked side by side, without urgency, without hesitation, and disappeared behind a door. I left before they came out. I did not need more proof. What I needed was time. That night, Lena came home later than she said she would. She talked about work in broad terms, complained about deadlines, and fell asleep quickly. I lay awake longer than usual, not replaying images, but arranging information. There is a difference. The next morning, I checked our shared accounts. I did not go digging at first. I just scanned. There were withdrawals I did not recognize, small enough not to trigger alarms, frequent enough to matter. Prepaid cards, cash advances. Nothing illegal, nothing accidental. I checked the dates. They lined up with the receipt in the wallet. By the end of the week, I knew 3 things with certainty. Qley had been in my car. Lena had been lying consistently, not sporadically. and whatever was happening had been happening for a while. The engagement dinner with her parents was still scheduled. Invitations had not gone out yet, but deposits had been paid. People were making plans around us. That context mattered because it explained why she was careful, why the lies were structured instead of chaotic. On Friday afternoon, Lena said she needed the car to pick up something bulky for the wedding. She asked without looking at me, already expecting agreement. I handed her the keys and watched her leave, then got into my own car and followed at a distance that felt ridiculous until it felt necessary. She did not go to a store. She went back to the motel. This time, I parked closer. I waited until I saw her room number. I waited until I saw Qley arrive. I waited longer than I needed to, just to make sure this was not coincidence or convenience. When I finally walked up to the door, my heart rate was steady. That surprised me. The hallway smelled like old cleaning chemicals and damp carpet. The door was plain, scratched, and unremarkable. I knocked once, firmly, not aggressively. The door opened. Qley stood there, relaxed, wearing a jacket I recognized immediately. It was one of mine, older, something I rarely wore anymore, but never threw away. That detail landed harder than everything else combined. He looked confused for a fraction of a second, then alert. Lena was behind him, partially obscured, frozen in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with exposure. I did not raise my voice. I did not step forward. I did not ask questions. I said one sentence, calmly, to make sure there was no misunderstanding, and then I turned around and walked away. I did not hear what happened behind the door after that. I did not need to. When I got back to my car, I sat there for a while before starting the engine. I was not deciding whether to stay or leave. I was deciding how this would end. That decision had already been made the moment I put the wallet back under the seat instead of throwing it on the driveway. I did not go home right after leaving the motel. Driving back to the house would have meant facing Lena immediately, and I was not ready to do that yet. Not because I needed time to cool off, but because I needed time to understand what kind of situation I was actually in. There is a difference between discovering infidelity and discovering a system built to hide it. I drove aimlessly for a while, long enough for the adrenaline to settle and for my thoughts to organize themselves into something usable. The image of Qley wearing my jacket stayed with me longer than the motel room itself. It suggested familiarity, access, and entitlement. It suggested that the affair was not new and not impulsive. People do not borrow clothing in emergencies. They borrow clothing when they expect to be there again. When I finally returned home, Lena was already there. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her phone face down, her posture rigid in a way that looked rehearsed rather than spontaneous. She started speaking as soon as I walked in, but I did not register the words. The structure of the moment mattered more than the content. She was explaining, not asking. That alone confirmed that the truth had been managed for a long time. I listened without interrupting, not because I believed what she was saying, but because interruptions reveal urgency. I wanted to see how far she would go if she thought I was still uncertain. She framed the motel as a mistake, Qley as a problem she had failed to fully escape, and herself as someone who had tried to protect the future we were building. The logic was circular and fragile, but it was delivered smoothly. I did not respond that night. I told her I needed space to think and slept in the guest room. That decision unsettled her more than any argument would have. Silence removes leverage. The next morning, I took a day off work. I did not tell Lena. I left the house as if everything were normal, then circled back once I saw her drive away. I needed to know what else existed in the open when she was not around to curate it. I started with the practical things. Shared accounts, shared subscriptions, shared calendars. There was nothing overtly incriminating at first glance, which meant the concealment had been intentional. Someone had put effort into keeping transactions small, spread out, and unremarkable. That takes planning. The prepaid card stood out once I stopped looking for large amounts. They were purchased regularly, sometimes 2 at a time, always in cash equivalents. The locations matched places near the motel. The timing matched nights she claimed to be working late or meeting friends. I checked our credit report next. Not because I expected fraud, but because long-term deception often leaves administrative fingerprints. There were no new lines of credit, but there were soft checks I did not recognize. Employment-related checks, not financial ones. That detail bothered me more than the money. By midday, I had a clearer picture. Lena was not just hiding an affair. She was maintaining 2 parallel versions of her life, each with its own narrative and infrastructure. That kind of duplication does not happen accidentally. That afternoon, I met with her sister, Monica, under the pretense of finalizing details for the engagement dinner. Monica had always been cordial, but distant. She treated the wedding like a formality rather than a celebration. At the time, I assumed that was just her personality. In retrospect, it looked more like restraint. We met at a cafe near her office. Monica was distracted, checking her phone frequently, answering emails, and glancing at the door as if she were expecting someone else. I kept the conversation focused on logistics at first, easing into it without pressure. Eventually, the topic of Lena's stress came up. Monica mentioned that Lena had always struggled with transitions, especially when it came to endings. She said it casually, but the phrasing stuck with me. Not breakups. Endings. I asked her, carefully, whether Lena had stayed in contact with people from her past. Monica hesitated just long enough to matter. She said she did not know specifics, but added that Lena had a habit of keeping options open until something felt secure. She framed it as a flaw, not a moral failing. That was enough. After we parted, I drove back to the motel, not to confront anyone, but to understand the environment. I wanted to know how visible Lena and Qley were to people who did not care about discretion. The clerk recognized Qley immediately. That was telling. Regulars do not stand out unless they want to. I asked general questions under the guise of curiosity. I did not need details. I needed confirmation that this was not a one-off location chosen in panic. It was not. On the drive home, my phone buzzed repeatedly. Lena was calling. I let it ring. Control had shifted, and she felt it. That evening, I told her I had canceled the engagement dinner. I did not explain why. I did not accuse her of anything new. I simply stated it as a decision that had already been executed. She reacted with panic rather than anger, which confirmed what I suspected. The dinner was not about family bonding. It was about stability. Later that night, while Lena slept restlessly, I went through the storage closet in the hallway. I was not looking for souvenirs or hidden phones. I was looking for documents. Old habits die hard, and people who manage lies often keep records without realizing it. In a box labeled tax returns, I found envelopes addressed to Qley. They were older, but not old enough. Utility notices, medical paperwork, items that suggested Lena had been acting as an intermediary for him, not just an emotional contact. I also found a copy of a lease agreement. Not current, but recent. Qley's name was on it. Lena's signature was on the witness line. That was the moment the story changed shape. This was not an affair resurrected out of weakness or nostalgia. This was a prolonged arrangement that predated our engagement and continued alongside it. Qley had not been eliminated from her life. He had been relocated. The following morning, I confronted Lena with specifics, not accusations. Dates, amounts, locations. She tried to deny what she could, then pivoted to minimizing what she could not. She framed Qley as dependent, someone she felt responsible for. She framed herself as someone caught between obligation and aspiration. I did not argue with her framing. I let it stand, because it revealed something useful. In her version, she was not choosing between two people. She was managing assets. That afternoon, Qley showed up at the house. He did not call first. He did not knock politely. He acted as if access had been granted previously, which told me everything I needed to know about how often he had been there when I was not. I answered the door calmly. He tried to explain, then tried to intimidate, then tried to negotiate. The sequence was predictable. When none of it worked, he shifted blame to Lena, which confirmed that whatever loyalty existed between them was conditional. I told him to leave. I did not threaten him. I did not warn him. I simply stated that he no longer had permission to be there, and that any further contact would have consequences unrelated to personal conflict. He left reluctantly, but not quietly. That night, Lena packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. She said she needed time to think. I did not stop her. Space was no longer a problem. It was a solution. I spent the rest of the night documenting everything I had found. Not for revenge. For accuracy. By the end of part 2, one thing was clear. This situation was not going to resolve itself through conversation or forgiveness. Too many systems had been built on the assumption that I would never fully look. And now that I had, the damage was already structural. Once Lena moved out of the house, even temporarily, the space felt different. Not emptier, but quieter in a way that made patterns easier to see. When someone has been managing parallel lives, their absence leaves behind loose ends. I spent the first morning after she left walking through rooms that suddenly felt less curated. Drawers were half organized. Files were grouped by convenience rather than logic. The order she maintained when she was present depended on constant attention. Without it, the structure weakened. I started with her laptop. We had always respected each other's privacy, which meant passwords were rarely changed. I did not have to guess or force anything. I opened folders that were labeled vaguely, the kind people use when they expect no one else to look closely. Travel documents came first. Nothing alarming on its own. Then employment records that did not align with the timeline she had given me about her career progression. One file caught my attention because it was duplicated in 3 locations. Redundancy is rarely accidental. It was a resume, recently updated, but not for the role she claimed to be pursuing. It listed responsibilities she did not have and dates that overlapped with periods when she was supposedly working late at her current job. The formatting was clean, professional, and clearly prepared with care. What stood out was the reference section. One name appeared twice under different titles. Cole Barrett. Not as an ex. Not as a personal reference. As a former supervisor. That explained the soft background checks. By mid-morning, I understood the situation more clearly. Lena had been positioning herself to move jobs, possibly move cities, while keeping Cole anchored to her through financial and logistical support. The motel was not a stopgap. It was a buffer zone, a place where she could compartmentalize without crossing streams. I contacted a mutual acquaintance from her workplace, someone I trusted to be discreet. I asked neutral questions about restructuring, about upcoming openings, about whether Lena had mentioned leaving. The answers came easily. She had. Quietly. Strategically. She had framed it as ambition rather than escape. That afternoon, I received a call from Monica. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She asked me directly what was happening, because Lena had called her in a state that suggested something had gone badly off script. Monica sounded more resigned and surprised. That reaction mattered. We met again, this time not in public. Monica told me things she had never intended to say out loud. Lena's relationship with Cole had not ended cleanly 2 years ago. It had stalled. He had lost his job shortly after their breakup, and Lena had stepped in to help temporarily. Temporary turned into extended. Extended turned into dependency. Lena did not want to abandon him, but she also did not want to stay with him long term. That tension had never been resolved. When I entered the picture, Lena had seen an opportunity to stabilize her future without confronting her past. Monica did not excuse it, but she explained it with clarity. Lena had always been afraid of instability more than dishonesty. That explanation filled in gaps I had not been able to close myself. I asked Monica one question before we parted. I asked her whether their parents knew any of this. Monica shook her head and said Lena would never risk that. Appearances mattered too much. That gave me a choice to make. The next step was not dramatic. It was administrative. I contacted the venue and reviewed the contract. There were clauses for misrepresentation. Not moral clauses. Financial ones. Shared liability clauses that applied if information affecting the agreement had been withheld. The wording was specific enough to matter. I contacted the planner next and placed the process on hold pending clarification. No accusations. No explanations. Just enough to freeze momentum. That triggered consequences faster than I expected. Lena called repeatedly. When I did not answer, she escalated to emails. When emails did not work, she showed up at the house unannounced. I did not let her in. Not because I was afraid of confrontation, but because I needed distance to remain objective. That evening, Cole contacted me again. This time, his tone had changed. There was urgency in it, and something close to panic. He told me Lena was cutting him off financially and emotionally at the same time, something she had never done before. He framed it as cruelty. He framed it as betrayal. I listened long enough to understand one critical point. Cole had assumed that no matter what happened between Lena and me, his support would continue. That assumption meant he had been promised continuity. I ended the call without comment. The following day, Lena's employer contacted her for clarification regarding discrepancies in her resume. Someone had flagged overlapping roles and inconsistent references. That kind of review does not end careers, but it delays progress. Timing mattered. She had been preparing to move. Now she was stuck. Her parents reached out next. They did not accuse. They asked questions. Practical ones. About timelines. About decisions. About whether the wedding was still happening. I told them the truth without embellishment. I provided documentation where necessary. I did not speculate. I did not editorialize. The silence that followed that conversation lasted 2 days. On the third day, Lena arrived at the house again, this time accompanied by her father. He asked to speak with me privately. We sat at the same table where Lena had once explained the motel away as a mistake. This time, the explanation was not accepted. He apologized, not on her behalf, but for assuming stability where there was none. He told me they had believed Lena when she said the past was resolved. He admitted they had helped financially under that assumption. That admission mattered more than he realized. Lena sat quietly while this happened. She did not interrupt. She did not correct. She was watching systems collapse that she had relied on for years. After they left, I documented everything again. Conversations. Dates. Changes in behavior. Not because I expected legal action, but because accuracy prevents revisionism. That night, I slept in my own bed for the first time in days. The next morning, I received a message from the motel. A billing inquiry. Cole had attempted to charge a stay to a card that had been deactivated. The front desk had reached out because my contact information was listed as an emergency reference. That detail told me Lena had begun severing ties in a way that affected him materially. She was not managing anymore. She was reacting. By the end of part 3, the situation had expanded beyond personal betrayal. Lena's career trajectory had stalled. Her family trust had fractured. Cole's dependency had become visible. The wedding infrastructure was frozen. Financial support streams were collapsing simultaneously. And the most important thing had become clear. This was not about choosing between two people. It was about a system built on the assumption that I would never force it into daylight. By the time the 4th week began, there was nothing left to uncover. Everything that could surface had already done so, not through confrontation or spectacle, but through the slow failure of systems that could no longer support each other. What remained was execution. I met with a lawyer first, not because I wanted retaliation, but because I needed finality. Engagements create obligations long before weddings do, and I wanted to understand exactly where I stood. The answer was simpler than expected. The shared deposits could be recovered under misrepresentation clauses. The joint accounts could be closed without penalty. The lease transfer would require signatures, but those were already in progress. That afternoon, I signed the cancellation documents for the venue. The planner did not ask questions. She had seen enough of these situations to recognize when explanations were unnecessary. The deposits were partially refunded. The rest was documented as forfeited under conditions that did not implicate me. Lena learned about the cancellation from the planner, not from me. That mattered. It meant the decision existed independently of any conversation she might try to steer. She came to the house again that evening, alone this time, and waited on the front steps. I did not invite her inside. She told me she had ended things with Cole completely. She told me she had cut off all contact and all financial support. She told me she had chosen the future she thought we were building. The sequence of her statements revealed the problem. Choices made after exposure are not the same as choices made freely. I acknowledged what she said without affirming it. I told her the wedding was no longer happening and that the house would be transferred back to me as sole occupant by the end of the week. I told her she could retrieve the rest of her belongings once arrangements were finalized. She asked whether there was any possibility of reconsideration. I told her no, without elaboration. Over the next few days, practical consequences unfolded quickly. Cole attempted to contact me twice more, once through a mutual acquaintance, and once through a work email he should not have had access to. Both attempts were documented and forwarded to legal counsel. A cease and desist letter followed. He stopped trying after that. Without Lena's financial support, Cole defaulted on the lease she had helped him secure. He left the area shortly afterward. Where he went did not matter. His relevance to my life had ended. Lena's professional situation deteriorated next. The resumed discrepancies delayed her application indefinitely. Internal reviews were conducted quietly. She was not terminated, but she was no longer considered for advancement. That kind of stall does not show up on paper, but it is felt immediately. Her parents withdrew their financial support within days of learning the full scope of the situation. Not out of anger, but out of disappointment. They had helped with the wedding under the belief that Lena had been honest about her past. Once that belief collapsed, so did their involvement. Monica reached out once more, not to defend her sister, but to thank me for handling things without dragging the family through unnecessary damage. She told me Lena was struggling to reconcile how much of her life had been built on assumption rather than intention. That struggle was not my responsibility. The house changed once Lena's belongings were gone. Not emotionally, but physically. The absence of constant adjustment made it easier to settle into routines that were actually mine. I sold the car shortly afterward, not because it reminded me of anything, but because it belonged to a version of my life that no longer existed. I closed the joint accounts and transferred what remained. Everything was itemized. Everything was transparent. There were no disputes left to argue. 3 weeks later, the motel sent a final notice addressed to Lena. She had forgotten to remove her name from the emergency contact list. I forwarded it unopened. It was not my responsibility to intercept the consequences of choices that were no longer shared. The engagement ring was returned quietly, not with ceremony, not with symbolism. It was a transaction reversed, nothing more. The last time I heard from Lena was through an email sent late at night. It was long, apologetic, and framed around understanding she claimed to have gained. She wrote about fear, about pressure, about mistakes she now saw clearly. She asked whether time might change anything. I did not reply. Silence was not punishment. It was boundary. Months later, mutual acquaintances filled in the gaps without being asked. Lena moved apartments. Cole resurfaced briefly before disappearing again. The job opportunity she had planned around never materialized. None of it was dramatic. It was simply the natural outcome of a structure that could not support itself once exposed. As for me, the damage did not linger the way people expect. There was no spiral, no long recovery arc. There was adjustment, then stabilization. I redirected energy toward work, toward friendships that had not required management, toward routines that did not depend on omission. The most lasting effect was clarity. I learned that betrayal is rarely chaotic. It is usually organized, optimized, and justified internally long before it is discovered. The danger is not the act itself, but the system built to sustain it. That system collapsed the moment I stopped ignoring small inconsistencies and chose to verify instead of assume. Everything that followed was just cleanup.